Imagine raising a child with all the love in your heart, only to have him change the locks on the very home you built together. This is Marion's story, a story of sacrifice, betrayal, and the kind of love that can't be stolen. Stay with me until the end, because what she does next will leave you speechless. If you believe love is stronger than betrayal, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs hope today. It was a Thursday evening when Marion Ellis learned her world had shifted beneath her feet. The kind of Thursday where the sun can't decide if it wants to shine or sink away early, leaving the streets wrapped in a tired kind of quiet. Marion stood on her porch in Birmingham, Alabama, holding a reusable grocery bag against her hip. Inside was a warm rotisserie chicken, a loaf of bread, and a couple of canned goods she'd picked up on sale. Her cardigan smelled faintly of lavender, the kind of scent that clung to her from years of folding laundry with dryer sheets. She had lived in this house for 22 years. Every flower in the yard, every nail in the wall, every crease in the wooden steps carried a memory. But that evening, something felt off. She slid her key into the lock, turned it the way she had turned it thousands of times before, and felt resistance. She tried again, slower this time, as if patience might solve the problem. Then faster. Then upside down. But it didn't matter. The key didn't fit. Her heart stumbled in her chest. She frowned, tried again. Nothing. Marion's mind ran in small circles. Did I grab the wrong key? Is my hand slipping? Maybe the lock's just jammed. But deep down, she already knew. It wasn't her hand that was wrong. The lock had been changed. She knocked softly at first, then harder. Still clutching the grocery bag in her arms, she knocked again, this time with the side of her fist. Finally, the door creaked open just a crack. A sliver of her own hallway peeked through, the hallway she had mopped, painted, and decorated with family photos. Standing there was Tessa, her son Daniel's girlfriend. Tessa's face appeared almost startled, like she hadn't expected company. "Oh, hey," Tessa said, her voice thin. "You weren't supposed to be back until later." Marion blinked, her throat dry. "Why can't I get in the house?" Tessa hesitated. She glanced over her shoulder, then slipped outside, closing the door behind her as if she were guarding something. She lowered her voice. "I think Daniel was going to talk to you about that." Marion's stomach tightened. "Talk to me about what?" Tessa's next words dropped like a stone. You don't live here anymore." Silence. Heavy and cruel. Marion felt her arms stiffen around the grocery bag. She didn't know whether to set it down or cling tighter. Her mind buzzed, searching for logic, but nothing about this moment made sense. "What did you just say?" she whispered. Tessa gave a nervous smile, the kind people where when they know they're standing in the wrong but don't want to admit it. "Look, it's just paperwork stuff. Nothing personal. Daniel said you agreed to transfer the deed." "Oh, what?" "You signed the papers a few weeks ago. Remember all those documents on the kitchen table?" The memories began to click, sharp and painful. The forms. The folder Daniel had pushed toward her. His easy words, "It's just housekeeping, Mama. We need to get things in order in case something happens to you." She had trusted him. She had trusted her son. Her hands trembled now. But before she could say another word, Tessa muttered something about calling Daniel and slipped back inside. The door shut. The lock clicked, and Marion was left standing outside her own home. She stayed there for a minute, then 5, then 10. No one opened the door again. Finally, she stepped down the porch stairs, moving slow, the rotisserie chicken still warm against her arm, cradled like a baby. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she wasn't going back inside. That night, Marion sat in her car parked 2 blocks away, in front of a row of duplexes with chipped paint and plastic chairs on porches. She didn't cry, not once, but her hand stayed gripping the steering wheel long after the engine was turned off. The chicken sat cold beside her, grease seeping through the plastic. She stared out the windshield at nothing. Grief isn't always about death. Sometimes grief is about realizing someone you loved, someone you raised, was never who you believed they were. As Marion sat there, the night pressed in. She thought back to the beginning, to the very first time she saw Daniel. It was 1998. She was working the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital. Marion had long made peace with the idea that motherhood wasn't in her path. 2 miscarriages and 1 failed attempt at IVF had left her with invisible scars. She told herself her calling was nursing, caring for people in the in-between places of life. But then one night, they brought in a 2-year-old boy. His wrist was fractured. His t-shirt was too big, stained with mustard. His cheeks were sunken, his eyes wide and wary. His foster mother didn't stay. She simply dropped him off with child services and walked away. The boy clung to Marion's scrubs like a vine. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat unless she fed him herself. Marion hadn't planned to adopt. But sometimes God doesn't knock. Sometimes he places a child in your arms and dares you to let go. 2 months later, Marion filed the first set of adoption papers. 6 months later, the boy had her last name. She named him Daniel Ellis. Her friends thought she was crazy. You're a single woman in your late 30s, Marion. You really want to take on a child like this? She would just smile and say, no, I don't want to take on the whole world. Just this one. Raising Daniel became her purpose. She decorated his room with a race car bed. She packed his lunches and wrote his name in marker on the bags. She took him to piano lessons, swimming lessons, Saturday zoo trips. When asthma made him struggle for breath, she found the best pediatrician. When he fell behind in reading, she hired a tutor. She even taught him how to braid hair using action figures, telling him, one day you might have a daughter, and she'll need to know her daddy can take care of her too. Marion gave him everything she never had, and for years, she believed it was enough. But love doesn't always guarantee loyalty. By the time Daniel reached middle school, questions began to surface. Why don't I look like you? Why do people stare at us in the store? Why do kids say I'm adopted? She always answered with the same truth. Yes, you're adopted, but that doesn't mean you're not mine. Still, something in him remained unsettled. By high school, he pulled away. By college, his visits were rare. Quick dinners. Hey, mama, before rushing out. Marion kept his room just the way he left it, always waiting for him to come home. When Harold, her husband, passed away, Daniel started visiting more. He came with Tessa, helped mow the lawn, checked on her blood pressure pills. For a time, Marion believed they were healing. But she didn't realize Daniel wasn't coming back to rebuild. He was coming back to take inventory. And so here she was, 22 years after opening her heart to him, sitting in her car outside the house she once called home. The betrayal cut sharper than any scalpel she'd seen in an operating room. But Marion wasn't broken, because though Daniel had taken her house, he had not taken her strength. And Marion Ellis was about to remember exactly who she was. When Marion thought back on it, the betrayal didn't happen on the porch that Thursday night. It had happened weeks earlier, quietly, almost invisibly, across her own kitchen table. The same table where she had once spread out finger paints for Daniel in kindergarten. The same table where she iced birthday cakes, stitched buttons, and helped him puzzle out multiplication problems. It was at that very table, worn smooth by years of living, that she signed away the deed to her house without knowing. It had been an ordinary Saturday afternoon. The smell of fried catfish still lingered in the air. Daniel had arrived with Tessa, carrying a manila folder and that confident smile he had started wearing in his 20s. The kind of smile that said, "Don't worry, I've got it all under control." "Mama," he said, laying the folder in front of her, "I've been looking at your taxes. You've got too many things scattered around. This is just housekeeping. Makes things easier for you. Easier for me to help out." She was tired that day. Her joints ached from pulling a double shift. She trusted him. She didn't even read the fine print. She just held the pen and signed where he pointed. Looking back, Marion remembered how he didn't quite meet her eyes when she asked, "You sure this is necessary?" "Of course," he said. "You'll thank me later." At the time, she thought nothing of it. After all, Daniel had always been her boy, even if he had grown distant. Even if college had changed the way he called, the way he laughed, the way he looked at her, as though she were just ordinary. The drift had begun long before that Saturday. She remembered the first time Daniel asked about his birth parents. He was in 9th grade, standing in the hallway with his backpack hanging from one shoulder. "Did they love me?" he asked. Marion paused, choosing her words carefully. "I believe they couldn't love you the way you deserved. That's why God gave you to me." He nodded, but his eyes carried a shadow she couldn't lift. By senior year, Daniel was restless. He wanted bigger things, faster things. He wanted to leave Birmingham. He wanted a car that cost more than Marion's annual salary. He wanted the world to bend toward him, and Marion feared she couldn't keep pace. When he left for college, the house grew unbearably quiet. Marion kept his room just as he left it. Posters on the wall, trophies gathering dust, textbooks stacked haphazardly. She would open the door, sometimes just to smell the faint scent of his cologne, to remind herself that he still belonged there. Phone calls became shorter. Visits grew infrequent. Holidays were rushed, as though he were merely stopping by between other, more important plans. When Harold died, her rock, her partner, the man who had prayed with her every morning before work, Daniel returned more often. For a little while, Marion's heart softened with hope. He came with Tessa. He mowed the grass, carried groceries, joked in the living room. She thought, maybe loss has brought him home. Maybe love is circling back. But now she understood he wasn't circling back. He was circling in, taking stock. The day she signed the papers was the day he marked her house as his. She should have noticed. The folder was too thick for just taxes. The way he tapped the table was too urgent. But Marion wanted to believe, and belief can sometimes blind. After he left that afternoon, she had made herself a cup of tea. She remembered thinking how proud Harold would have been. Their boy, grown up, taking responsibility, helping his mama. She never imagined that pen strokes could steal a life's worth of work. The truth began to drip, drop by drop. One evening, Marion overheard Tessa on the phone while setting dishes in the sink. Tessa's voice carried down the hall. Yeah, once the house is settled, we can look at Dallas. Daniel says the market's great there. Dallas. House. Market. The words clanged in Marion's head like loose pans. She wanted to confront Daniel then, but fear kept her quiet. What if she was imagining things? What if she accused him wrongly and drove him further away? She tucked the doubt deep down, where mothers hide the questions they don't want to face. But then came that Thursday night. The changed lock, the slammed door, and the truth she couldn't ignore anymore. That evening, as she sat in her car with groceries growing cold beside her, Marion let her mind wander through the years. She remembered the small moments, the simple ones. Daniel at 6 years old, running across the yard with a plastic fireman's hat, shouting, "Mama, I'll save you." Daniel at 10, sitting on the porch steps after losing a baseball game, while she reminded him, "Losing isn't the end, baby. It's the lesson." Daniel at 16, laughing with his friends, the car radio turned up too loud, his smile so bright she had to blink. She had poured every ounce of herself into that boy. Every sleepless night shift, every missed vacation, every extra dollar saved went toward his future. And now, all of that love had been traded for a stack of papers and a new lock. The next morning, Marion drove to the cemetery. She parked by Harold's headstone and sat in silence. The grass was damp. Birds flickered through the oak branches. She whispered, "I think our boy tricked me, Harold. I think he took the house." Her voice cracked, but no tears came. She pressed her hand to the cool stone, the way she used to press her hand to Harold's back when he was sleeping. "You always said I was too soft on him," she continued. "Maybe you were right, but I couldn't help it. He was mine. Or, I thought he was." For a moment, the weight of loneliness pressed her down. But then, like a quiet spark, another thought came. Daniel may have stolen her house, but he had not stolen her story. And she still had more power left than he realized. That weekend, Marion packed a small bag and checked into a roadside motel on the edge of town. It was cheap but clean, with faded floral curtains and a humming air conditioner that rattled in the night. As she lay on the stiff mattress, she made herself a promise. She would not live out her years as a victim. She had survived miscarriages, heartbreak, and Harold's death. She had stood in hospital corridors holding the hands of strangers as they took their last breaths. She was not about to let betrayal break her now. But before she could fight, she needed an ally. And that's when she thought of Calvin C.J. Brooks, Harold's old friend, a retired lawyer who lived across town. A man who once told her at a barbecue, "Marion, you're tougher than you look." Yes, C.J. would know what to do. The stage was set. Marion wasn't going to beg Daniel for her house back. She was going to take back her dignity, her name, her home, one step at a time. Marian Ellis had always been the kind of woman who carried her pain quietly. When life bruised her, she didn't announce it to the world. She folded it into herself, like a letter sealed and tucked away in a drawer. So when she found herself sleeping in a roadside motel, the hum of the air conditioner louder than her own heartbeat, she didn't cry. She prayed. She whispered into the silence, "Lord, I don't know what you're doing, but please give me strength to stand." The next morning, she rose, smoothed her dress, and drove to the only person she could think of who might understand, Calvin C.J. Brooks. C.J. had been Harold's friend for over 30 years. They had met in college, two young men with big ideas and empty wallets. C.J. had gone on to law school, Harold to teaching. Though their lives had taken different paths, they had stayed close. Barbecues, football games, church picnics. Marian had known C.J. almost as long as she had known her husband. Now retired, C.J. spent most mornings at a small diner on 3rd Avenue, sipping black coffee and reading the newspaper as though the world still moved at a slower pace. When Marian walked in, he looked up over his glasses. His eyebrows rose. "Well, if it isn't Miss Marian. Haven't seen you in ages." She slid into the booth across from him. "I need your help, C.J." He folded the paper, sensing the weight in her voice. "Then you've got it. Start from the beginning." And so she did. Over steaming cups of coffee, Marian told him everything. The lock on her door, the words from Tessa, the papers Daniel had placed in front of her, the betrayal that still echoed like thunder in her chest. She spoke quietly, but with a steady rhythm, like a nurse reciting chart notes. Old habits of precision hadn't left her. When she finished, C.J. leaned back in the booth, whistling low. "Marian, I'm sorry. That boy of yours pulled a fast one. I trusted him," she whispered. C.J. shook his head. "That's what makes it ugly. But listen to me. Just because you signed something doesn't mean it sticks. If he tricked you, if there was misrepresentation, we can fight it. A court won't let fraud stand." For the first time in weeks, Marian felt a flicker of hope. But then came the part she hadn't told anyone. Not even Daniel. Not even her closest church friends. She set her cup down carefully, as though the weight of her secret might spill over the rim. "C.J., there's something else you should know." He raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" She hesitated. For a moment, she considered keeping it to herself. But she knew if she wanted to fight this battle, she needed honesty. "When Harold died, you remember what happened?" C.J. nodded. "Medical malpractice. They mismanaged his meds. I sued the hospital," Marian continued softly. "It took 2 years, but we settled." C.J. leaned in. "How much are we talking?" Her voice barely carried across the table. 8.7 million. The coffee mug nearly slipped from C.J.'s hand. 8. "Marian, are you serious?" She nodded. "It's tucked away. In trusts. Under my maiden name. Daniel doesn't know." For a long moment, C.J. simply stared. Then he let out a long breath, shaking his head. "Lord have mercy. You've been sitting on millions, and meanwhile, that boy is running circles around you for a house." Marian's eyes dropped to the table. "I didn't want money to change the way I loved him. I wanted him to see me, not a bank account." C.J. softened, his voice lowering. "Money didn't change you, Marian. It changed him. That's the difference." They sat in silence for a moment, the diner's clinking dishes and chatter filling the air around them. Finally, C.J. leaned forward, his lawyer's voice returning. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we'll pull the deed. I'll file a claim of fraudulent transfer. With your notes, your timeline, we can build a case. Did you keep any records?" Marian almost smiled. "You know me, C.J. 20 years of nursing. I document everything. Dates, conversations, little details. I write it all down." "That's gold," C.J. said. "You've got the receipts. We'll use them." For the first time since the lock had turned her away, Marian felt her spine straighten. She wasn't powerless. She wasn't a victim. She was a woman with a story, a secret, and now, a plan. That evening, Marian returned to the motel with a small notepad in hand. She sat at the desk by the window and began writing. March 3rd, Daniel brought folder labeled taxes. Sign forms. March 21st, overheard Tessa on phone, mentioned Dallas, and the house. April 12th. Lock changed. Page after page, she wrote down memories, details, conversations. The act of writing steadied her, reminded her that her life had order, even if her heart was bruised. But it wasn't just strategy that carried her forward. It was also something deeper, the knowledge that Daniel didn't know the whole of her. He thought he had taken everything by taking a house. He didn't know about the millions set aside in quiet accounts. He didn't know that his mother, the woman he underestimated, had more power than he could imagine. And Marion planned to keep it that way. The next week, she and CJ met again. This time, in his small office downtown, the one he never fully gave up after retirement. Legal books lined the shelves, their spines cracked with years of use. CJ spread papers across the desk. We'll need sworn statements. We'll need to move fast before he tries to sell the place. Marion nodded, her voice calm. I'm not after revenge, CJ. I don't want to ruin him. I just want my dignity back. I want my name back on my door. CJ studied her face. You know, most people in your shoes would want blood. Marion smiled faintly. Blood doesn't heal. Peace does. That night, as she lay in her motel bed, Marion whispered to Harold again. They think they've taken everything from me, she said softly. But you know the truth, Harold. You always said I was stronger than I looked. Maybe it's time to prove you right. The shadows on the motel ceiling shifted with the headlights passing outside. For the first time in weeks, Marion drifted into sleep without fear. Because she had remembered something vital. She was not finished. She was only beginning. The papers were filed. The legal path was set. CJ had told Marion to sit tight, to let the system do its work. But Marion's heart wasn't settled. She had spent her life raising Daniel, watching him grow, guiding his steps when he was small, reminding him of his manners when he was older. She had loved him with everything she had. And now he had become the kind of man who would steal her house with a pen. But before the lawyers, before the hearings, before judges and papers and signatures, Marion needed one thing. She needed to stand in front of her son and speak. Not for him, but for herself. It was late afternoon when she drove back to Birmingham. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in amber streaks. Her hand stayed steady on the wheel, though her chest felt heavy. When she pulled into the driveway, her breath caught. The yard looked neat but not alive. The hedges trimmed too perfectly, like someone trying to impress strangers. Her flowers, the begonias she had tended for years, were gone, replaced by store-bought bushes that had no story, no roots. She sat for a moment in the car, gathering herself. Then she stepped out, smoothed her dress, and walked to the porch. She knocked once. The door opened, and there he was, Daniel, her boy, though he was no boy anymore. He stood there in sweatpants and a hoodie, a protein shake in his hand, earbuds still dangling from his ears. He froze when he saw her. Ma, he caught himself. Marion, what are you doing here? She didn't flinch. She kept her voice even. I need a word with you. He hesitated, then stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind him. His eyes darted toward the street, as though worried who might see. Look, if this is about the house. She raised her hand, silencing him. Let me finish. He fell quiet, maybe out of respect, maybe out of guilt. Marion drew a breath. Her voice trembled at first, but then it steadied. I raised you when no one else would. I found you when you were just 2 years old, hungry and hurting. Nobody wanted you, but I did. Not because I had to, not because I was looking for a child. I did it because I saw you, and I gave you everything I had. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked away, but Marion continued. I gave up sleep for you. I gave up vacations, money, time. I gave you my body, my health. I worked double shifts so you could have piano lessons and summer trips. I packed lunches with your name on them. I taught you gratitude. I taught you care. I even showed you how to braid a doll's hair, because I wanted you to be ready if you ever had a daughter of your own. Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. And after all of that, after 20 years of my life poured into you, you repay me with signatures and locks. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. You signed, though. It's not like I forced you. Marion's eyes snapped to his. Her voice cut sharper now. Don't call me Ma if you don't mean it. The silence that followed was heavy, thick. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. Marion straightened her shoulders. When she spoke again, Her words were measured, deliberate. I'm not here to argue. I just need you to know something. You think you left me broke. You think you left me with nothing but a motel room and a broken heart. But you're wrong. Daniel frowned. What are you talking about? Her gaze didn't waver. I have money, Daniel. More than you could ever imagine. Enough to buy this house 10 times over. I kept it from you because I knew money would change you. And I was right. For the first time, Daniel's mask cracked. His face shifted from disbelief to confusion, then to something else, shame. I didn't know, he muttered. You weren't supposed to, Marion replied. Because love isn't business. Loyalty can't be bought. But now I know who you are. And so do you. He swallowed, his voice lower now. So, you're going to sue me? Marion shook her head. No, Daniel. I'm going to remind you what a real home costs. She didn't wait for him to respond. She turned, walked back to her car, and opened the door. Daniel stood frozen on the porch, his protein shake still in hand, his mouth half open but silent. Marion drove away without looking back. That night, she sat in her motel room, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, her chest felt lighter. Not because she had hurt him, but because she had finally spoken her truth. She didn't need his apology to validate her. She didn't need his approval to feel whole again. All she needed was her voice, and she had found it. The next weeks passed in a blur of meetings and documents. CJ filed the claims, lined up the evidence, and built the case. Daniel didn't show up to any hearings. Tessa disappeared from the picture entirely. By the third month, the judge ruled in Marion's favor. The deed transfer was voided. The house was legally hers again. But Marion didn't move back in. Too much of her heart had bled in those walls. Too many memories of betrayal lingered in the corners. Instead, she sold it. Quietly, without fanfare. The buyer, a retired teacher, said the house felt heavy when she walked in. Marion only nodded. Some places carry their stories in the air. But selling the house wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because Marion knew she couldn't spend her life looking backward. She needed to build something new. Something that mattered. Something no betrayal could touch. The house was gone. The papers were signed, the funds transferred, and Marion walked away without a backward glance. She had no interest in repainting the walls, no desire to scrub out the ghosts. That house had been a chapter of her life, but it was not the whole book. And Marion Ellis was ready to write the rest. She drove south, away from Birmingham, down the stretch of highway lined with pines and weathered billboards. Her heart ached with loss, yes, but also beat with something new. Possibility. In Mobile, Alabama, she found what she was looking for. 3 modest homes sitting side by side, worn but steady. The kind of houses built in the 60s, with screened porches and squeaky floorboards. They weren't fancy, but they had soul. Marion stood in the overgrown yard with CJ at her side. He squinted at the peeling paint and cracked driveway. You really want these old things? Marion smiled softly. I don't see houses. I see doors opening. Within weeks, work began. Contractors patched roofs, repainted walls, and fixed plumbing that had been neglected for years. Marion oversaw everything with the precision of a nurse. Careful, detailed, unshakable. She named the place Eleanor's Haven, after her mother, who had taught her to pray, to work, and to stand tall. This was not just property. This was a refuge. For women like her. For women who had given their lives to family, only to be abandoned. For women who had nowhere to go when betrayal knocked them off their feet. The first to arrive was Alma. Her grandson had forced her out, pressuring her to sign over her pension so he could manage it better. When she refused, he told her she wasn't welcome anymore. She came to Eleanor's Haven with nothing but a battered suitcase and a stack of church bulletins. Marion welcomed her at the door. You're home now, she said. Alma wept in her arms. Then came Darlene. She had been recovering from surgery when her daughter sold her house, pocketing the money and leaving Darlene to beg for a spare bed. A friend brought her to Eleanor's Haven, where Marion served her warm soup and soft bread. You're safe here, Marion promised. Darlene nodded, tears brimming in her tired eyes. Soon, the houses filled with voices. Laughter floated from kitchens where collard greens and cornbread simmered. The women swapped stories on the porches, sometimes painful, sometimes funny, always real. Marion wasn't just their host. She was their sister, their mother, their steady hand. She cooked with them, prayed with them, watched game shows in the evenings, cheering louder than anyone when someone solved the puzzle. For the first time in years, Marion felt alive. CJ still dropped by, carrying stacks of paperwork or a peach pie from his sister's bakery. He shook his head one evening as they sat on the porch. "You know, Marion, you ought to be on a billboard. The woman who turned betrayal into a blueprint." She chuckled. "I don't need a billboard. I just need peace." Then, more softly, she added, "I just did what Mama taught me. Pray, stand your ground, and protect your peace." CJ raised his glass of sweet tea in salute. A year later, a letter arrived. The handwriting stopped Marion cold. She would have known it anywhere. Daniel's. She sat at the kitchen table, letter trembling in her hands. Alma and Darlene gave her space, retreating quietly to the porch. She unfolded the paper. "I messed up. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I thought I was owed something. Maybe I didn't understand what you gave me. You didn't deserve it. I hope you're okay." That was all. No grand apology. No promises to change. Just a handful of broken words from a son who had lost his way. Marion folded the letter and slipped it into her Bible. Not to forget, but to keep. Not as a wound, but as a lesson. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't about excusing him. It was about freeing herself. That evening, Marion sat on the back porch of Eleanor's haven. A blanket around her shoulders, a warm cup of tea in her hands. The Alabama sunset blazed orange and gold across the horizon. Alma hummed upstairs as she folded laundry. Darlene clattered pots in the kitchen, cooking greens with smoked turkey. The world felt whole again. Marion had learned something painful but true. You can pour your heart into someone, give them every ounce of love you have, and still lose them. Not because of who you are, but because of who they choose to be. That loss was not hers to carry anymore. She had built a new home, a place no betrayal could take from her. Because love, real love, cannot be stolen.